Evan Cole had barely taken a sip from his coffee when the door of Annie's roadside diner swung open. 6 men strode in, their presence an assault on the cozy, quiet diner nestled just off Highway 50. The scent of gasoline and cigarette smoke followed them like a toxic cloud. Their boots thudded against the linoleum floor, reverberating through the room and drawing every eye. Locals froze mid-bite, their gazes flicking toward the newcomers, with a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. These were the Iron Reapers, a notorious biker gang that had left a trail of destruction through small towns across Nevada. The leader, a hulking man with a bald head and a jagged scar across his temple, went by the name Axel Vane. Axel's sneer curled around the cigarette clenched between his teeth as he surveyed the room, exhaling smoke like he owned the place. His men spread out behind him, leering at the customers and muttering cruel jokes. They laughed loudly at the diner's dated decor and mocked the pale-faced waitress who clutched her notepad like a lifeline. They were wolves in a pen of sheep, and everyone knew it. Evan remained seated in his booth near the window, his broad shoulders hunched slightly as he cupped his coffee. He didn't look up as the gang entered. His short-cropped brown hair and square jaw gave him the look of a man who'd been through his share of battles, and his quiet demeanor only added to the intrigue. At 6'2", with a lean but muscular build, he had an air of quiet authority that made most people hesitate before crossing him. His faded jeans and plain grey t-shirt didn't give away much about him, just another traveler passing through. But his eyes, sharp and piercing blue, told another story. Axel zeroed in on Evan almost immediately, his lip curling as he approached the counter. "Well, look what we've got here," Axel said, his voice carrying through the room like the growl of a wild animal. "A stranger in our little playground. Ain't that right, boys?" His crew cackled, the sound grating against the nervous silence of the diner. Evan's jaw tightened, but he didn't look up. He took another measured sip of his coffee, his gaze fixed on the chipped mug in his hands. He'd been back in the States for 6 months now, but the instincts of his years as a Marine captain had never faded. He could feel the weight of the gang's eyes on him, their taunts like distant echoes compared to the cacophony of combat he'd left behind. "Hey, soldier boy," Axel barked, stepping closer to Evan's booth. The term was spat like an insult. "You deaf, or you just too good to talk to us?" Evan raised his gaze, calm and unflinching. He took in Axel's bulk, the patchy beard of the man to his left, the crooked nose of another biker to his right. Each of them had a weapon holstered or sheathed, a knife here, a chain there, and each one reeked of stale beer and misplaced bravado. Evan's voice, when he spoke, was steady. "I'm just having coffee." The gang erupted in laughter, a sound meant to humiliate. Axel leaned forward, planting his hands on the table. The proximity forced Evan to tilt his head slightly to meet the biker's gaze. "Coffee? That all you're here for? Looks to me like you're trying to pretend you don't hear me, and that's just rude." Evan's fingers tightened imperceptibly around his mug. He'd seen this play out before, bullies sniffing for weakness. They were trying to make him flinch, to justify escalating their game. "I heard you," Evan replied, his tone even. "Just don't have much to say." The gang's laughter died down, replaced by an uneasy silence. Axel's grin faltered for a moment before he straightened, his hand dropping to the chain looped around his belt. "You're either brave or stupid, soldier boy," he said, his voice low. "Which one is it?" Evan didn't answer. He set his mug down carefully, his movements deliberate. The tension in the diner was thick, suffocating. Behind the counter, the waitress edged toward the phone, her hand shaking as she reached for it. Axel noticed and pointed a finger at her. "You touch that phone, and I'll make sure this place burns to the ground." The threat hung in the air, silencing any thought of intervention. Axel turned back to Evan, his sneer deepening. "See? Nobody's going to help you. You're on your own, soldier boy." Evan's calm exterior never wavered, but inside, he was calculating. 5 bikers were within striking distance, each one dangerous in his own way. Axel was the ringleader, but the real threat was the man standing by the door, a wiry figure with sharp eyes and a switchblade partially visible in his pocket. Evan knew if he moved, he'd have to neutralize him first. "You know what your problem is?" Axel asked, leaning in again. "You think you're better than us, all you soldier types do. But out here, In the real world, your medals and your training don't mean shit. Evan's lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. You think this is the real world? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. This, he gestured vaguely to the diner, the gang, the cheap linoleum floor. This is nothing. The gang bristled at the comment, their bravado slipping into anger. Axel's face darkened, and his hand tightened around the chain at his waist. You've got a death wish, don't you? Not today, Evan said, his tone calm. But I'm not the one you should be worried about. The words hung in the air, their meaning unclear but heavy. Axel's eyes narrowed as he searched Evan's face for a sign of fear, a crack in the armor. He found none. Instead, he saw something that made him hesitate. Resolve. Pure, unshakable resolve. Before Axel could react, the wiry man by the door shifted, his hand slipping toward the switchblade. Evan moved faster. In one fluid motion, Evan shoved the table forward, forcing Axel to stumble back. He sprang to his feet, closing the distance to the man by the door in 2 strides. The switchblade was halfway out when Evan's hand clamped down on the man's wrist, twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the floor as the man let out a yelp of pain. The diner erupted into chaos. Axel roared, lunging at Evan with the chain. Evan sidestepped, grabbing a chair and using it to deflect the strike. The heavy links wrapped around the chair's back, and Evan yanked it forward, pulling Axel off balance. A quick elbow to Axel's jaw sent him sprawling to the floor. The remaining bikers hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Evan to grab the switchblade from the floor. He didn't brandish it as a weapon. He held it low, a silent warning that he didn't need it to take them down. His movements were controlled, his breathing steady. This wasn't a fight for him, it was an operation. Enough, Evan said, his voice cutting through the noise. Leave. Now. Axel staggered to his feet, blood dripping from his split lip. His eyes burned with humiliation and rage, but he saw the way Evan moved. Efficient, precise, deadly. Axel wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and spat on the floor. This ain't over, soldier boy, he snarled. Evan didn't respond. He stood his ground, his posture relaxed but ready. The other bikers began to retreat, muttering curses under their breath as they followed Axel out the door. The diner was silent as the sound of their motorcycles roared to life and faded into the distance. Evan set the switchblade on the counter and returned to his seat, picking up his mug as if nothing had happened. The waitress stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Evan nodded once, his gaze distant. He didn't do it for thanks. He'd done it because it needed to be done. The locals began to relax, their murmurs filling the diner once more. Some nodded at Evan in quiet gratitude. Others avoided his gaze, unsure how to process what they'd just witnessed. But one thing was clear. Evan Cole wasn't just passing through. He was a force to be reckoned with, and the Iron Reapers had just learned that the hard way.